So I've been working on a new theory for the last couple of weeks, and I wanted to do a quick overview of it. So the main problem that I have had, I think, in my adult life is the inability to motivate myself to make money without necessity. And this has been a thorny problem because for lots of reasons, I think most people motivate themselves to make money without necessity, essentially through some sense of competition, which is another way of saying some sort of social anxiety. They're comparing themselves to other people, trying to push themselves to make money by comparing themselves to either their peers. And that in my adult life has not really worked for me because I have always been so far behind my peers in terms of career and money that the gap always felt too crushingly big to potentially close. And so it felt impossible. And I was never able to use that as a motivation. And recently, I think I discovered a solution to this problem. And I think it might actually be a solution to a lot of problems all in one fell swoop. But let me try to describe it. Essentially, you've heard this saying that people say that comparison is the thief of joy. And I have for a long time said that I think that that is a stupid saying because comparison is obviously not the thief of joy. Comparison is a vital part of perception. In fact, I think comparison might be the majority of perception, your ability to compare things to other things. And so obviously you need to be able to compare things. And so it's equally obvious that comparison is not always the problem. There's something else. Although I think it is also equally obvious that comparing at the wrong time does seem to steal your joy. And then, so something that I realized a long time ago is that if you believe that life is fair, I think that is the real thief of joy. Thinking that somehow we are all starting on a level playing field and that we all have equal or comparably equal starting points. And therefore, it makes sense to compare yourself to other people and use the progress of other people who are your quote peers as a rubric for measuring how well you should be doing in life. And I think that that is actually, I always said that that is the problem. If you believe that, then that will actually steal your joy. And so comparison is the problem, is believing that life is fair is the problem. And I don't think that is wrong, but I think I have a much better way of saying it now, which is that if you're like me, when you hear somebody say you shouldn't compare yourself to others, you might have assumed that they meant you shouldn't compare yourself to people that you assume are better than you. And so what I realized recently is that it's actually not just comparing yourself to people you assume are better than you or people who are your peers. It's also people that you assume are worse than you as well. I didn't realize that I have a superiority complex, or at least I think I was aware, but I didn't know how to address it or fix it, and I wasn't really thinking about it in these terms. What I realized is that you have two problems actually, not just comparing to people who are better than you, which I think will steal your joy, but also comparing yourself to people who you think are worse than you causes an opposite kind of problem, which is that I think it creates loneliness. Because if you are comparing yourself to other people, then the people who you perceive to be worse than you, and I think I'm not sure how ubiquitous this perspective is in society. I think it is very ubiquitous, but I'm not sure if it is a problem that everyone contends with. I think I have met a few people who I think do not struggle with this, but I think it might definitely the majority of society has been fed and believed some sort of narrative along these lines that it makes sense to compare yourself to other people. And so when you do that, you can't just compare yourself to people that you think are quote better than you. You have to also compare yourself to people who think are worse than you, which create a huge loneliness problem because it's very difficult to associate with people that you think are better than you because you have to pretend to be better than you are, which is a huge burden in order to associate with those people. And likewise, it's very difficult to associate with people you think are worse than you because, I don't know. And so you have the loneliness problem comes from essentially you only really can easily hang out with people you perceive to be your peers. And so what I realized is that the solution to the problem is to stop comparing yourself to other people at all. And the problem with that is that if you're like me, the thought of doing that is scary because you instantly feel very unmoored. If you're like me, I think my entire life been comparing myself to people that I thought were better than me and worse than me. And I use that as an orientation for how to live my life, how to think about my life. And as soon as I got rid of that comparison, what I realized is that the orientation that I was using to direct myself in life was gone. And The reason that's scary is because most people, I think, are using that orientation as their delineation for motivation. They don't want to be like someone they perceive to be worse than them, and that is a motivation. They also want to be like people they perceive to be better than them, and that is a motivation. And if you take away that orientation, then they can't use those motivations anymore. But what I've discovered is that, or at least what I am concluding, is that this is actually a massively better way to look at it. So if you're not comparing yourself to people you think are better and worse than you, then you're not better than anyone, which means that the loneliness, or the perceived loneliness, self-separation that you impose on yourself to keep yourself away from people you think are worse than you, suddenly evaporates. You're not worse, or you're not better than anyone. You're not better than a person who's digging through the trash looking for cans to sell. You're not better than a homeless person or somebody who's addicted to drugs, which is something that I think I thought for my entire life. I thought I was better than those people. And you're also not worse than the people who are supposedly doing better than you. Even by whatever metrics that you think you have a fair comparison to compare yourself to your peers, you're not worse than them either. And what that means is that all of a sudden, your social opportunities dramatically open. And that, I think, also probably can make you feel a bit unmoored, because now you are on equal footing with everyone. The trash diggers and the billionaires, they're not better and worse than you. They're just people. And so it solves on many levels the loneliness problem. There's a self-imposed isolation that comes from people who are comparing themselves to other people. And when you stop doing that, the self-imposed isolation necessarily evaporates. And I think that is potentially one of the biggest social skills that can exist. I think this is, but further, the ability to motivate yourself to make money without necessity suddenly comes into view. There was a problem for me, which was that I couldn't motivate myself to make money without necessity, because the only way to do that was either through anxiety, essentially being anxious that other people were better than me and wanting to be like them, which I think is essentially an impossible thing, because I don't think that people are comparable. I think it's a fallacy to believe that. And so the problem with motivating yourself with anxiety is that it might work in the short term, but if you ever become better than the people you were comparing yourself to in order to motivate yourself, then you run out of steam, or at least like there's a potential that you might lose the ability to continue to excel. And also, if you fall too far behind, you also would run out of motivation, because like me, the gap would be too big and you'd be crushed by the near certainty of never being able to close it. And so when you give up that comparison, what you have left is essentially you are free to make your own motivations regardless of other people. And at first this might feel daunting, but after you look at it for a while, you start to realize that there are things that motivate you despite other people. And actually, when you are motivated by those things just by yourself on your own, it's a much more pure and concrete type of motivation, because it's not reflected through the eyes of other people or through the situations of other people. And you'll realize that there are things you were doing all along because other people were doing them, or because other people thought they were good ideas, that you never actually cared about. You were just doing it because you were comparing yourself to others, and therefore you had to be somebody who was towing the line and doing what other people were doing. But when you give up that comparison, you no longer have to do that, and you can do things that you care about really truly for yourself. And it's a totally different paradigm. This is, again, one of those situations where on the one side you have the fallacy of self-protection and safety, and then on the other side you have a dramatic efficiency improvement at the cost of giving up that illusion of safety. And this is exactly that. You comparing yourself to other people represents protecting yourself, because it gives you an easy orientation to how you should live your life. And giving that up represents leaving that illusion of safety, because you no longer have an easy orientation, but you are also much more free and able to do the things you actually care about doing. This is also dramatically confidence inspiring, because all of a sudden, when you're not comparing yourself to other people, better or worse, you realize that nobody is better than you. And also that because your social options open up dramatically, you find that there were many situations where before you were acting insecure because you had very few opportunities, because the band of people you would allow yourself to be around, who you think are your peers, is very small, and then there's many people below you and many people above you. And so if you're trying to interact with people who are above you, usually necessarily they are in very limited supply. So it creates tension and insecurity in the situation. And when you give up that comparison, all of a sudden there is no tension and insecurity in this situation because they're not better than you and there isn't anyone worse than you. You can go and talk with other people who are supposedly worse with you and create connection with them. There is no fear of loneliness. And so the insecurity and the tension in talking with people that you might otherwise want to talk with evaporates. It makes you secure by default instead of insecure by default. And also, I think there's another thing in similarly, because of the situations where the people you perceive to be your peers are few, if there are situations where you really need to interact with somebody, often it takes on an extreme bent and outlook, and it looks a lot more like serious manipulation because you really need to interact with them because there's very few people that you actually want to be around in that narrow band gap of people who you consider to be your peers. And when you give up that idea of people who are better and worse, then all of a sudden you don't have peers anymore. You can interact with anyone and they're all equally valid to interact with, which means that the need to go to extremes in order to interact with people evaporates. And you're much less likely to find yourself in a situation where you might be doing something that is ethically gray in order to interact with people. Like the appearance and feeling of manipulation goes way down because you just don't feel the same need or necessity to interact with specific people because there's just so many more options. And there's another thing, which is, so in the process of motivating yourself to make money, you have necessity as a motivator under either paradigm. With the comparison or non-comparison, you can still use necessity to motivate yourself. But when it comes to motivating yourself to get more than what you need, when you're comparing yourself, you can really only use insecurity as a motivator, which often leads to things that feel unethical. And so in order to avoid doing things that feel unethical, often people turn to the opposite extreme, which is doing things that are good for humanity, good for others. That's their motivation, which is the only alternative that you have when you are motivating yourself with comparison to others. It's either do things that feel unethical or do things that feel only good. There's no real middle ground. And so, but the problem with doing things that only feel or that are only good for others or altruistic is that you burn yourself as the fuel to do those things. And so you get the short end of the stick either way. Either you're doing something that is unethical, which is bad, or you're doing something that is purely good for others and you're burning yourself to do those things. And when you give up the comparison, suddenly you can do things that are selfish, but in a healthy way. It's kind of like the analogy of putting on your own oxygen mask before you help someone else put on their oxygen mask. I think all healthy altruism flows out of this kind of selfishness first, because you need to be able to put on your own oxygen mask first. You need to be able to take care of your own needs, and then out of the abundance of having your own needs solved, can you help other people meet their needs? And you can't do that effectively if you're comparing yourself to other people, because you have only those two extremes, either doing things which feel unethical or doing things which are purely good and altruistic, neither of which is a healthy extreme. And when you give up the comparison, all of a sudden you can do things that are motivations for yourself only. You don't have the temptations to go to the extremes. You're more in touch with your own desires and feelings. And it's really a healthy kind of selfishness where you can attend to yourself and not feel bad about it. And also, you just don't have to worry about the appearance or propensity for doing extremely unethical things, or if you're doing something, you're doing it for yourself and not because other people think it's cool or good. After you have met your own needs, after you've done all the things you're motivated to do for your own necessity, after that, you really only need to consult yourself for what you want to do next, instead of use the insecurity of comparison to other people to motivate you. So I'm starting to think that this might be one of the most fundamental perspectives that I want to write about in my book. I don't think I've said it that well here today, but this is just like a taste. I'm still working on it. I think there's also more that I'm going to be adding to it soon, but hopefully this gives an idea of where I'm going with this. Also, I've done a bit of experimentation. I've been working on this for a few weeks, and I can already feel a shift in my own perspective where I already feel less insecure and about many things. Insecure about the fear of being alone, way less, and less insecure about And also just like I feel like an honest and real desire to make money for, I think, the first time in my adult life, because I actually get behind the self-interest without fear that it's unethical, and without fear that I'm going to the opposite extreme of only doing altruistic things, which I have personally experienced how bad that is for me in the past. Anyways, it's been a remarkable couple of weeks, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. I feel like there's more to be added to it, and I'm already just feeling an abundance of confidence that I didn't have just a couple of weeks ago in social interactions. Also, I feel like there was, I'll probably expound more on this in the future, I felt like there was a social fatigue that I would have before. And what I've come to realize is that I think that social fatigue was literally just that self-comparison. I was trying to reserve my interactions for people that I felt like were, quote, worth it, people who were peers or higher, and that was exhausting. And what I've realized is that if I don't reserve my interactions for that, or if I don't reserve the quality or the type of my interactions for that, I have abundantly more energy to interact with people, because I'm not putting on that false face that I didn't even know I was putting on. And I don't know, it's been wonderful. That's all.